الجديد أمي قبل الاستعمار. نبدأ؟ جيد. Bona tarda a tothom. Sentem aquest retras, així que ara són i 44. Llavors comencem. La conferència és en anglès, llavors. We start. Bona tarda and good afternoon. My name is Rashid Arab, Assistant Professor of International Relations at the University Autonomous of Barcelona and lecturer of the Master in International Relations, Security and Development. Today, I am moderating the last session of the lecture series of the Aula Mediterranea 2022-2023 program. This conference is co-organized between the Maurice de Master program and the European Institute of the Mediterranean. It's a pleasure for me to moderate the lecture of Professor Abdelwahab El-Affendi on the paradoxes of Sudanese politics. As you know, the recent tragic eruption of unprecedented levels of violence in the Sudanese capital Khartoum has highlighted a problem that plagued modern Sudan. However, it's also highlighted some of its paradoxes. Even during the most violent civil wars, Khartoum has been haven for those fleeing the conflict. Sudan has been the scene of many shocking conflicts, both in their cruelty and their longevity. The question today that arises is why these people in Sudan fighting, and why the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces are fighting each other. We have here a great expert on Sudanese politics, Professor Abdelwahab El-Affendi, is President and Provost of the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Between 2017 and 2020, he has been at the School of Social Science and Humanities at the Institute. His main fields of research are democracy and Islam, Islamic thought, Muslim intellectuals, as well as Sudanese and Middle Eastern studies and politics, among others. In 1998, Professor Abdelwahab founded the Democracy and Islam program at the University of Westminster, which he coordinated until 2015. Professor Affendi was visiting fellow and professor at different institutions as the Christian Michelson Institute, Cambridge University, Oxford University, Northwestern University, and the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization in Malaysia. He has delivered speeches and lectures at most major universities in the US, in the UK, and in a number of universities in Asia, Africa, and South America. His last publication as after the Arab Revolution, the Centering Democratic Transition Theory, published by Edinburgh University Press and edited with Khalil Al-Anani in 2021. And the second book is Genocidal Nightmares, Narratives of Insecurity and the Logic of Mass Atrocities, edited by Bloomsbury, 2016. Now the professor will have 45 minutes to address the subject, and then we will open the discussion after for your question. Professor Affendi, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Rashid, and thanks for inviting me, all the friends who invited me here, and thank you all for coming. I think the last time I came to Barcelona was many years back, and we were still at that time had a conference here, that time of exclusively Sudanese people discussing what's happening in Sudan, and that I think was before the 2005 so-called comprehensive peace agreement. So I'm happy to come back again, but still the subject seems to be the same for some reason. The good news, I think, is that I have lost most of my speech today, according to technology, because I had got a prepared speech, but for the first time, the Word document cut half of it for some reason. I've been looking for it. Usually you have a history of the document and you find whatever you lost, but for some reason this time it didn't happen to me. I will have to make an investigation about what happened. Must be the Spanish internet. Now, when we spoke, Rashid and myself and Elizabeth, many moons ago about this speech, of course, the situation in Sudan was different. So I prepared a talk telling you how good we Sudanese are and how nice we are. And so I have now to change it a little bit, but I'll still tell you how nice we are Sudanese. In fact, I was surprised when I was trying to revise my work. I found that there's still something I could say about this. I should point out also that my title now of my talk, which is called "The Paradoxes of Civility and Barbarism in Sudanese Politics." I borrowed it partly from my friend Alex Duval, who actually used this term in a chapter he published in one of the books mentioned by Rashid, Genocide and Nightmares, about Sudan, and he actually discussed some of the topic I'm going to discuss here. So I'll be back to that one, but I'll start by a story which happened also many years back in 1992. I was in Atlanta at the Carter Center, where they were having one of their many conferences on civil wars, and the Sudanese civil war was part of it. So when I went to, I was a diplomat at the time, so I had a meeting with President Carter and his team, and when incidentally, my first visit to Georgia was when Carter was still president. But I'm still a young man, don't have any ideas other than that. I was a trainee pilot in Albany, Georgia. And I told him when I met, I said, I was one of your, under your government for one time. And he said that actually Albany is where his security detail live, because the nearest biggest city to play is Georgia. So he said to me, why don't we have an informal meeting for the Sudanese parties from different parties and factions, the SPLA, the government, and everybody. And I said to him, President Carter, everybody was having lunch and I was there. All the Sudanese, the SPLA, the government. And he said to me that you Sudanese really amazed me. And he told me actually his own anecdote. He said 3 years before that he was heading the talks in in Nairobi between the SPLA and the Sudanese government. And he said, I spent the night trying to make up some jokes, which I will then, when the people come, the atmosphere is going to be really icy, so I will tell a couple of jokes and everybody will laugh and the atmosphere will. And he said, then when we walked into the room, the government side came from here and the SPLM side from there, and everybody started hugging each other and asking about their family, and of course they knew everybody else's children by name, since most of them were army officers in the same army. And he said, I was looking like this and said, why are these people fighting? So, this is what I've started with. That's our paradox. We're very nice people, but we kill each other all the time. So what's wrong with us, or what is right with us? The issue which I'm, a few months later after that, actually, I had a similar occasion when I was also taking part in the Abuja 3 months or 4 months later from that. There were peace talks also between the government and the SPLM, and at that time there were 2 SPLM factions which are also fighting each other. And there was a reception held by the Nigerian foreign minister, and everybody was present there. And the Reuters correspondent, who happened to be British, we were standing watching this, and he said to me, what is happening? I can't tell who is who in this. Everybody's mixing, everybody's fraternizing. And he said to me, I have covered so many civil war talks, but usually nobody even shakes hands. And nobody certainly fraternizes outside the negotiation room, and not with this warmth and friendliness where, and also he asked me what's happening. So it seems that this is now, like everybody else, I have been reflecting on this, and many others have been reflecting on what is the issue of Sudanese. They seem to be usually, as I would quote from another observer, Robert O. Collins, the late famous American historian. He wrote that many foreign observers of the Sudanese scene are enchanted by the warmth, charm, and friendliness of the Sudanese of every ethnicity, which make them unique among the peoples of the world. While admitting that he had no answer about what this thing is, nor he knew everybody who can explain it, outsiders are usually fascinated by the Sudanese, and Colin adds, I do know that I cannot recall any Westerner who has not established a deep affection for the Sudanese while at the same time cursing this bloody country. Among expatriates, this fondness with the Sudanese, he said, is called Sudanitis, which is an incurable disease or affliction. He said, I watched it carried by retired British officials in the Sudan who I have known, the captains of capitalism whom I have seen make unprofitable decisions caring for the Sudanese, tough journalists and sophisticated diplomats who write of their overwhelming affection for the Sudanese in their memoirs, and hundreds of workers from the NGOs were reflecting on his or her souvenirs, firmly declared them the best years of their lives, as with every academic whom I have ever known. He concluded that the Sudanese as well are well aware they have something that is indefinable, something very special And that is more their identity than their ethnicity. Regardless of this, of course, as you know, the Sudanese politics have been witnessing increasing polarization since independence along the political left-right unity, along the long left-right, along issue of unity with Egypt or independence, sectarian, Mahdist or Khatmiya, ethnic, regional, north, south, center, periphery, Darfur, the rest. The Sudanese post-independence politics started actually before independence with a bloody riot in Khartoum in 1954 when the Ansar, who were trying to meet President Najib, who was visiting Sudan, were upset because he took a different route. Then we had the 1955 mutiny, of which I will say a little bit more later, and then a military coup in 1958, which introduced violence into the equation in a big way. Polarization increased progressively with time, while the military regime of Ibrahim Aboud, for example, was paternalistic and did not employ excessive repression or major purges. The following left-wing military regime of Jafar Nimeri was much more bloody and repressive affair. It engaged in widespread purges, first against traditional politicians, and then against its own communist allies after the Red attempted the coup in 1971. Later, it announced a radical Islamist measures that were very disruptive. However, the previous regime of Omar al-Bashir was by far the most repressive and polarizing regime. However, Sudanese civility defied these lines of polarization with social occasions, cross-cutting family, professional and neighborhood links, mitigating the division. There are plenty of anecdotes to support this, in addition to overwhelming evidence, often from paradoxical aspects. For example, the former leader of the Muslim Brotherhood was imprisoned in 1959 falsely involved in a failed coup that year, told me when I was interviewing him that his colleagues in the Brotherhood has sacked him from his position because they didn't approve the coup, which he interestingly organized with some left-wing officers, and they stopped communicating with him due to the political differences. However, the leader of the Communist Party of the time, Abdelwahab Mahjoub, whose home was close to the prison where he was imprisoned, would visit him regularly, sent him food from his home almost daily, and at times he said he brought me Islamic books when he was visiting him, which was also rather interesting. And if you attend any social occasion in Sudan, especially at condolences in a bereavement, you are sure to find all sorts of bitter political enemies chatting amicably side by side. This went in tandem with bitter polarization, especially within the factions themselves, and so on. During the 1983 to 2005 civil war in the south, over 4 million displaced Southerners moved to the north, of whom 1.8 million lived around Khartoum alone, in and around Khartoum. While life of the displaced was harsh and not hassle-free, the regime removed them forcibly from squatting areas near town centers and put restrictions on foreign aid. It was clear that large numbers felt safe in the north. Instances of inter-ethnic conflict or friction in Khartoum were rare. in limited instances, such as when sections of the displaced population protested violently on the occasion of the death of SPL leader John Garang in a plane crash in July 2005, the tension subsided very quickly. By the way, I almost became a casualty in that protest because I was trying to get into my house when about 17 young Southerners armed with sticks and bars began attacking my car. But for some reason, they just suddenly decided to stop, and somebody called them and went somewhere else. So I'm still alive thanks to that distraction. Now, these paradoxical aspects of Sudanese civility have deep roots. It is established in traditional cultures as well-known poetic portrayal of a tribal figure as a fierce fighter in the wilderness, but then very hospitable at home. In the Sudanese Arabic, كاتار في الخلا وعقبان كريم في البيت. There was a story relating the first instance in which this mixture of hospitality and conflict presented itself. There was a kingdom called the Kingdom of Tagali, which is in the modern-day Jibal Nuba mountains. And they did have actually a marriage relationship with the Sennar kingdom, in the sense that the king of Tagali has married the sister of one of the princesses of Sennar. But for some reason, there was an incident where apparently the king of Tagali arrested and took the money of one of the traders from Sennar. So the king of Sennar decided to go and invade that country. So a big army went there, and they started fighting. Tagali was on a hill, was a mountainous area, so it's not easy. So the story goes is that the fighting starts all day. Then when the evening comes, the king of Tagali will send food down to his enemies, saying that you are guests here, so we don't want you to go hungry. That was putting humanitarianism a little bit too far, but it is, they say that after a few days, the Sennar people felt embarrassed and ashamed and said, we cannot fight this guy who feeds us every day, so they left and had an agreement. So, of course, this paradox, I will just give a brief interjection. I don't want to push it too far, in that it's not specific to the Sudanese case. I mean, for example, we know from history, for example, the Greeks have an Athenian democracy, but then they had slavery, and also they had sayings against barbarians. And of course, all of us know that the notorious siege of Melos during the Peloponnesian War, when the Athenians used sophisticated and deceptively considered rational logic to legitimate genocidal retribution against the Milesians. In any case, also more recently, the mutually constitutive intermeshing between lofty liberal democratic rhetoric and the practice on one hand, and slavery and racism, imperialism and colonial subjugation on the other, has been noted. And it's illustrated by also in works by famous Democrats like Gino Stuart Mill, where he endorsed barbarism as an essential part of the civilizing mission for which colonialism fulfills. We know, of course, many others like de Tocqueville and and even Marx, who actually would favor the subjugation of barbarism. More recently, works like Ed Oren's enemies, Our Enemies and Us, looked at political science as a whole, in particular in America, as an ethnocentric ideology that continued to vindicate America's special role as a guiding force while indulging in crass racism. Jessica Blatt, more recently, went further, showing how racism has been both at the roots of American political science and remains constitutive of it. She reminded us that Woodrow Wilson was ensconcing racism in the American system, just as he was making the world safe for democracy. Although I am currently working on a critical book of the discipline under the title The Barbaric Science of Civilized Company, I'm not going to dwell on this angle lest I trivialize my thesis, which insists that the Sudanese case is unique and significant in spite of these parallels. This will take me back to Alex Doval's thesis, which emphasizes his argument is that this kind of civility is actually exclusive to what he called the riverain people from central Sudan, because the society has been settled for a long time and has cultural commonalities, and it's also has camaraderie in schools, in the military, and connections also by marriage and others. On the other hand, he argues that the people of the periphery were not party to this ethos, but they became acculturated in it, acculturated in it, and it has become like they are part of the elite, and they then become to learn the game, to play the game, because also since they are the weaker side, they cannot afford not to play the game. He also, of course, points the obvious that the conduct of the Sudanese in the peripheral areas of war, like in the south or Darfur, as we've seen, or when there is serious threats to the regime, they will go all the way in being as barbaric as possible. But I beg to agree a little bit with Alex on this, because I think that the norm of civility or hospitality in the Sudanese culture is not restricted to the elite. In fact, the modern elite are less party of it than the ordinary people, because now with the bourgeoisization of life, the elite live in high-rise buildings, and they have exclusive kind of quarters or neighborhoods, and they do not mix that much with, although it's within limits. But the ordinary people are still and not only in the riverine and settled areas, in Darfur, now in the south, because the incidents which, for example, the Carter mentioned or I witnessed, involved people from the south, from Darfur, from other areas, where we see the same kind of hospitality and tolerance. And I remember a story or a case which happened to some of my friends. We used to usually take the road from Khartoum to Madani, about 150 kilometers along the Nile and then one day, some of my colleagues, who are of course bourgeoisie pilots and senior administrators, were traveling, and then their car broke down on the road in an isolated area where there's not a city or a town, but they were they saw a couple of very modest houses on the side of the road. So they were sitting there. It was about lunchtime. They sent some message for somebody to come and repair their car, but they were waiting there. I said, in about an hour, then some guy from one of the houses came out with a plate of food which had nothing in it other than what we call in Sudan kisra, which is like pancakes made of sorghum, which is a bit bitter because they use yeast in it, and with tomatoes and water on the top. He has nothing else in his home. And he said to them when he brought it, he said, it's better the food be defective than its provider. This guy doesn't know them. We'll probably never meet them again. But he thought it's an obligation that these people who are on the road should be given whatever he can give them. Now, this is not an elite. This is a very, now, in more relevance to our particular time, when this very barbaric situation happened in Sudan in the last years, a lot of people moved from Khartoum and they went outside the countryside. Most of them have relatives. Many did not. But everyone who went, he found a place to accommodate him. There are no refugee camps. I know also of a lot of people who went to Cairo, for example. And I know at least 2 people, but there are many more. There's one friend of ours who had a flat in Cairo, 4 or 5 bedroom. He has accommodated 19 people in that house. There's another one who had get a flat of 2 rooms. He had 14 people staying in that house. So the more interesting is that this Janjaweed, the militia who commit all sorts of atrocity, including rape, and they take people's homes, throw them out. But the ordinary Sudanese sometimes will give them food. If they see them standing outside with looking miserable, people will say, let them have food. During Ramadan also, for example, because the Sudanese in Ramadan, most of them have iftar outside the house to invite everybody to come. So they would say, Janjaweed, come, please sit and join us. And then the army people will come and say, please join us, and there will be all of them eating at the same table. So there is, I also heard a recording for a member of this militia who was complaining about his situation. He said, I'm under siege. I need somebody to give me assurances so that I can leave. I don't want to be part of this war. I'm sitting here. Around me, there are 7 corpses, and I don't have any food. I don't have even money to get cigarette. But he added, a few guys around sometimes come and give me cigarettes or bring me food. So there is some perversity around these feelings. So we, again, coming back to the book we did with Alex Salai and other colleagues, in that book we tried to explain, to find explanation, not only for this, but issues of violence generally, genocidal violence. And the explanatory variable we used was the transformative impact of narrative of insecurity. In our research, we explored cases as diverse as Serbia, India, Iraq, Nigeria, and of course Sudan. We also looked at Islamophobia in Europe and the US, a phenomenon linked to the cases of Yugoslavia and India, where ethnic and religious bigotry go hand in hand. The pattern we have observed in these cases is that certain political or cultural entrepreneurs, usual intellectuals or politicians, come up with narratives pinpointing certain threats to group identity or vital interest, usually linking the threat to a certain category of malfeasance, conspirators, inherently evil communities like Jews, Muslims, Catholics, communists, bankers. Interestingly, sometimes joining the two. For example, the Populist Party in America in the early 20th century used to speak about conspiracies between bankers and Bolsheviks. So this simplistic and incendiary narrative usually depicts a threat of enormous magnitude and their agency, the more so since the ruling elite are too stupid, too naive, or too corrupt to perceive the threat or appreciate its magnitude. In some cases, the enemy is seen as brothers who are denying their identity or oblivious to it. For example, both Croats and Serbs in Yugoslavia claim that the Bosnian Muslims are either ethnic Croats or ethnic Serbs who have converted to Islam. And so they claim on this name that they are our brothers, and so, for example, Bosnia belongs to us, since these are our brothers. And so at the same time, of course, in India, the fact that the Indians are convert from ethnicities, other ethnicities to Islam, so the same thing can be said. Now, in the Sudanese case also, in many cases, there has been this kind of narratives, starting, for example, with the mutiny of August 1955. That mutiny started when the Sudanese government wanted to ask a company from the Equatorial Corps, the company which was in Torit at that time, to move to Khartoum, because at that time the British were still in Sudan. They were supposed to withdraw at the end of the year, and so they wanted to have a parade commemorating the withdrawal of British troops, and they wanted this parade to be represented by the Southerners, because they wanted to emphasize the brotherlyhood of the Southerners and the Northerners, and that we are one nation. At the same time, they started moving some officers, northern officers, to the south, because during the British time, there was the south was treated as a kind of closed district according to the law, where northerners are not allowed to go and southerners are not allowed to come. And the soldiers and the troops in the south were purely southerners, and no northerners were involved. And at the same time, there's no southerners in the north. So of course, the nationalist new government, which was elected in 1953, but was still wanted to involve the Southerners and wanted to create at least an image of unity. Now, when they asked a couple of hundred, I think 900 soldiers to go to the north and decided the date, they said to them, that the soldiers said, why can't we take our families with us? And they said, well, I think probably the army officer who was in control at that time spoke rudely to the soldier who suggested this. They also were told to take their guns but with no ammunition. And so immediately a story circulated that there is a plot here to take the Southerners to the north and massacre them there. And so a mutiny broke out because of both in deeply entrenched suspicion, but also problems of communication. But it led to the civil war, which lasted. Okay, so the in the current situation, I think, well, I'll come now to the current situation because that's, we have a very unusual development because, first of all, the magnitude of violence and barbarism which Khartoum witnessed has not been witnessed since the last days of the Mahdiya in Sudan, and also the arrival of Kitchener and his soldiers, which was equally traumatic in terms of dual anger, because Mahdiya itself was a very turbulent period, and let's admit was very brutal and violent. But when the Mahdiya ended, the soldiers of Kitchener were given 3 days to sack Khartoum, do whatever they like. At the same time, of course, there were many enemies of Mahdiya who were oppressed by the Mahdiya, also started taking revenge against the people. Now we see a situation where the usual Sudanese civility, as I said, when it appears, become like a perversion, because you are maybe the king of Tagali who fed the people who are killing his men is thinking in a hospitality way, but you don't feed the people who are killing you. The same thing, as I said, nowadays, there's the positive side of this Sudanese civility, which you have to acknowledge exists at the moment, and it is important and it could be built on. This is the sense I've tried to bring on, that there is no other country in the world which has these traditions of civility, of hospitality, which is ingrained, as I said, not in the elite, but in the population at large. The Western observers who witness that, they haven't witnessed it in only Khartoum or in the north. They saw it in Darfur, they saw it in Kordofan, they saw it in the east, they saw it in the south. There is this tradition, this rare tradition, this rare resource of civility and hospitality, which unfortunately has not been built upon and has been actually overridden by the stories of narratives of insecurity, narrative of demonization, narrative of suspicion. Nowadays, if you look at the social media, again, the social media and the new media have this aspect of him which is individualistic. They are not social. The social media are not social. Because every one of us is sitting in their room, closed with, and then says whatever they like, without regard, at least in the media, in the press, in the usual press, your editor will look at what you write, and there will be discussion about it, and maybe if it's too much or too. Now, if you are sitting in your room, you do whatever you like. Racism, violence, misogyny, anything you like, people say. So we do have at the moment, for example, in this conflict, you find people, for example, of course, they don't say the militias, for example, should be free to rape, although sometimes people say that they would say, well, other parties rape as well, or other parties. And I heard someone, for example, say, you know, a lot of Sudanese were engaged in looting. And this militia are Sudanese people, so they shouldn't be expected to do something which other Sudanese are not doing, and so on and so on. But still, of course, the other side would say, racists, nah, you so and so, you are barbarians, you are so and so, and so. But if I think I have run out of time, so I'll conclude. It is, I never tire of pointing out that this is a unique resource for us Sudanese. We should build on it. We should not squander it. We should do something. We should be something worthy of our culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Abdelwahab, for explaining these paradoxes of Sudanese politics. Maybe now it's very clear for me the paradoxal barbaric civility of Sudanese politics. Now we open the debate, and you can ask or comment this lecture.
First of all, thank you so much for...
1 minute, please, with me. And present yourself.
Hello, I'm Laurel. I'm doing a master's degree at eBay here in Barcelona, and I wanted to thank you very much for your presentation and your speech. I had a quick question about something that you said early on when you were discussing in the past when there were Southerners who went to Khartoum, and they were always kind of welcomed, and there was never really any racism that they faced. Then you also said that this, but then at times you said that this was also the case in other areas as well, like in Darfur, and that it was across the country. So I wanted to ask maybe a clarifying point. Do you think that this paradox of politics is only concentrated within Khartoum as a city, but then in the peripheral areas maybe is not present? Or are you arguing that indeed it's a phenomenon that is seen throughout Sudan? Thank you.
I think it would be an overstatement to say that they experienced no racism. I think what I'm saying is that they felt safe. Usually, if there is infighting, for example, even in the south itself, for example, when fighting broke out between the various factions after independence, they were targeting, for example, of Nuer intellectuals or Nuer soldiers in Juba, at the capital. So they had to flee from Juba because they didn't feel safe. Now, in Khartoum or any other in the north, there was only one incident, I think, in 1986, I think, when in a town in Darfur called Al-Dain, a train carrying Dinka immigrants fleeing from the north was attacked, and there was some slaughter. But that was a rare incident, and it was probably provoked by some conflict or some people killed or whatever. But usually there would be, and there are, Southern refugees in Darfur or in other areas who also felt safe there, because as I said, the estimate is that 4 million have left the south and came to the north. Only 1.8 million were in Khartoum. There is actually there were Southerners in most towns, even in the north in Sudan, in the far north near Egypt border, who would just go there and find work, Al Jazeera and whatever. So racism cannot be ruled out. I mean, there's, I think we Sudanese have a bit of this in the society, but that doesn't. And this is very important. It's not just tolerance. People will really be warm if you have neighbors. For example, next to my mother's home in Omdurman, there were Southerners living next to them, and they were in very friendly relations. So they visited there, and when I go there, they will tell me the news about their neighbors. For example, they told me their daughter is getting married. Their daughter has, for example, graduated from university, and they went to congratulate them. So there is this kind of warmth, not just tolerance and say, well, you are here, stay, but don't bother us and we won't bother you. No, there is kind of. So, and that's, I think, very important in that the warmth people speak about, whether Westerners or others, is not fake. It's real. People just feel that these are human beings, they are neighbors, they are so and so. We like anybody else, they treat them. So in this case, yes, I think it was a lot in many areas. As I said, some tensions do happen sometimes, but usually they subside quickly. And they are not, for example, encouraged by the state or by the government, which is important as well.
Thank you. Other question?
Hello, my name's James. I'm also from eBay, studying a Master's in International Relations. And I don't know much about the topic generally, but I found what you emphasized interesting, the contradiction between the civil relations people have, but then there's also extreme violence. And I was wondering, with your experience, do you have any, how do you think those things could be, how do you think the civility could be used to deal with these issues? Is there any kind of like, how would you see that bridge being gapped? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, from my side, I think the issue which happened, for example, in the south and in Darfur, unfortunately was engineered by some at two levels. One level, as I said, narrative of security, portraying, for example, the rebels, for example, as a threat. I remember I was interviewing somebody from Darfur, but he's an Arab, actually, from the same group or clan as this militia. At that time, the Porto militia, and he was a former. And he said to me, "We're defending ourselves. We are not aggressors," because he relates statements made by some people in Darfur against Arabs. And he said, "This means us. They want to exterminate us. We're defending ourselves." And of course, the soldiers who were sent to the fighting in Darfur or sent to the fighting in the south, they have to deal with day-to-day violence. And that it conditioned them. But usually, for example, when the peace in 1972 was was concluded, and then again in 2005, was very easily transformed. The relations was very easily transformed from relations of enmity to relation of cordiality and emphasizing what is common, that we are all Sudanese, we all want to build our country, everybody has a right to be different, and so on and so on. But here I think the role of the intellectuals is very important. Even, for example, there is one example we give, not about Sudan, but about the UK, for example. In 1968, Enoch Powell made his famous Manchester Rivers of Blood speech, in which he, at that time, luckily we Muslims were not there, so we were not targeted, but he says that the blacks are going to take over the country. And he gave an image. I said that I could see the black man holding a whip to the white man in Britain. And I contrasted that in my writing with, for example, Martin Luther King simile of white and black children holding hands. So you have an image there of friendliness and happiness and cordiality, and you have an image here of violence. Of course, it's very unlikely that blacks would take over Britain and start killing the white people, but they didn't do that in America, where they have been oppressed. Why should they do it in Britain, where they were actually feeling safe? But that speech created its own logic, in the sense that Enoch Powell became the most popular person in Britain at that time. And he was so powerful that I heard a lot of conservatives, if you saw some of the documentaries, they say at that time, even the workers were demonstrating in his favor, so the Labour Party itself hadn't got hold. But in the end, the British elite stopped him in his track. The media, Edward Heath dismissed him from the shadow cabinet, and he was ostracized in a sense. But if he had not been, if it hadn't been for the reaction of the British elite, Britain would have become an earlier Yugoslavia, because there was so much feeling that this guy is right, and these blacks should be removed, should be this, should be this. Just as in Islamophobia nowadays in lots of places. So I think in Sudan, because, as I said already, the spirit is there among the people. The majority of the people are not in need of convincing to be cordial to their fellow citizens. But the policies and the framework of the official narrative should be modified to emphasize this. On both sides, by the way. On both sides. I mean, there's another side to the, for example, 1955 mutiny, which I did elaborate on, but actually, one week before the mutiny, there was a Southern Army officer who was planning to kill Northern officers who were there. He issued a lot of propaganda, saying that the Northerners are coming here to take over, and we should do this, and we should do this, and we should do this. And he actually was arrested before that. There was, before and after the mutiny, narratives of fear and insecurity, what Northerners are going to do, what are they going to do to our women, what are they going to do this. And so when the mutiny happened, for example, a lot of Northern civilians, including women and children, were killed. And so there was in both sides at that time, there was, as I said, a problem of communication and a problem of management of fears by the elite. They should have been more careful to do that. And there was a problem from the other side, on both sides, where they were, the fear was there. I think probably the fear was genuine, but in the end also it has been stoked by entrepreneurs, quote unquote, using the whole atmosphere of mistrust, for example. If anybody was rational at that time, the British were still in control of the Sudan at that time, so it wouldn't be possible for the Sudanese, whatever they want, to take southern Sudan wars to kill them, because still the Governor General was in power. And they wouldn't do that in the capital, but of course, you can believe these things if you have this sense of. So it is very difficult to control these narratives of insecurity, but it could be and has to be done by the intellectuals in each community.
Thank you. Any other question or comment?
What was the specialization of the people here?
International relation. Who is international relation here? Okay. Arabic word studies. Arabic word studies. Immigration. Huh?
International studies.
International studies. Any other culture studies?
Who speaks Arabic? We do have at Doha Institute fellowships for people who can read Arabic, can come for a term at our school.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe the paradox is very clear now about Sudan after after this interest conference of Professor Abdelwahab. We can repeat, maybe in YouTube the video is registered. We want to work about Sudan. And finally, we can erase it. Okay. We close this last session of the cycle. Maybe we come back here in September, and have you good summer and good job. Thank you very much for your assistance.